number of new members in our caucus, and one of them said to Gene Krebs, Marilyn Reed said to Gene Krebs, you know, does Mike Fox have a lot of pilots in his district? And Gene said, I don't know. I don't understand that question. What do you mean? And she says, well, he has all these pilot programs. She said, I figured he must have an awful lot of pilots in his district to take care of that. Well, and when we won our races in 1992, and we picked up 8 seats, and our numbers went up to 46, which I think makes the most members that you ever had an opportunity to serve with, instead of talking about the 46-member Republican caucus, we talked about the 45-member and Mike Fox. Now, he is not known for short speeches. That was mentioned this evening. He is not known for short telephone conversations. In fact, at one time, we realized that he single-handedly kept one cellular telephone company in business in Ohio for a period of time. And the budget director finally came to us and said, could you pass legislation to require them to charge more for calls that are made after midnight rather than those that are made before, so he could get some sleep? Some of the best stories, and he won't come up and tell them, are Representative Tom Johnson. When they started out in the legislature, they roomed together. Now, he swore me to secrecy on some of these stories, but Mike had this habit of when he would come in and he would leave the car door open and he'd run in and out of the apartment, moving all this junk in that they carry back and forth with them, except one night he closed the car door and didn't look in it. When he went back out in the morning, he opened the door, this cat sprung out. He had locked up in his car all night, and I wondered where this cat had come from and what he was doing in his car. Some of the best stories around the State House are those that we tell about Mike Fox. And if you ever see us together around a dinner table, we're telling Fox stories. And I suspect when the Speaker writes that book that he talks about writing, there'll be a chapter on Mike Fox. But let me just say that some of the best legislative ideas around the legislature are also Mike Fox's, and many of those have been mentioned this evening. And he certainly has authored many of the things that we point to with pride from the Republican caucus. He is passionate about the ideas that he feels very strongly about. One of those is medically fragile children, and I have watched him almost single-handedly work to improve the climate and the care for medically fragile children in Ohio. That's what he feels about Hamilton and this district in Butler County. I have seen him time and again do the hard work to get for you those things that he needs. He is one of the hardest workers, most innovative member of our caucus. And Mike, we congratulate you on your 20 years, and we are proud to call you a caucus member, and we are proud to call you a friend. Thank you.
There's a lot of butt kissing going on here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. But there's few people like our next speaker that could tell the real story of Michael Fox. Now, I'll tell you, you know, as was so duly noted, Michael Fox became a young legislator. And at a young age, our next speaker knew him as a child. And we know that Mike Fox overcame a lot of handicaps himself that he doesn't mention. Kind of certain things that are taboo, as you get a little older, you grow out of them. It was a problem in his family, but I'll be very candid. I learned from our next speaker that Mike Fox was a bedwetter. It was not that that's so unusual, but he wet the bed up to the time he was 14, and that's not so unusual, but he did it from the dresser. That's what made him stand out in his family. He's always had his own way of doing things. Our next speaker began, in fact, this is the person we ought to be lynching. He began Mike's campaign 20 years ago as his first campaign manager. Mike refers to him as a true genius when it comes to politics. And I would say that if he's kept Mike in 20 years, he is a true genius. He is now the CEO of one of Cincinnati's premier marketing firms, Hensley, Siegel, and Rentschler, and he has received numerous awards and recognition for that particular field of excellence. He's in the program, as you might see. His family still resides in Hamilton, where he grew up. He is active in his community and his church. He remains close to Mike today. I'm going to introduce him. I don't know that it's his real name. He just got back to Hamilton from the Witness Relocation Program. And I present to you Richard A. Siegel, ladies and gentlemen. The man, the myth. Have fun.
Ray was only too glad to bring another vertically impaired person to the podium finally. You know, before I get started, we're here to pay tribute to Mike, but I want to take the opportunity to say some kind words about somebody else. It's really good to see Bob and Ruth Ann Bennett here tonight. I think all of us maybe have a handful of people that we look back in our life and say these were people who really played an important role in shaping our lives, and certainly I'm here to pay tribute to one of them tonight. But Bob and I, they're the kinds of people that we haven't done a good job of keeping in touch with each other, but they're true friends. Bob Bennett goes to work with me every day. There are people at my office that probably, if they knew, they'd lynch him tonight for hearing all of these maxims and proverbs and things that were Bennettisms. He's been a great chairman of our party, and by the time he's done, he's going to be the stuff of legends and go down in history with Ray Bliss and other great Republican leaders. And Bob, it's good to see you. Well, other than Ray Combs, I'm the only constituent on this panel. And I have a prepared statement, but as Ray told you, being from Hamilton, I do not know how to read. I have some real nice pictures here, but Mike doesn't want me to show them to you. You got to love that picture on the back of this program, though. We helped put the program together, and I added that caption on the for the program. But somebody, I think it was probably Mike's mother, had written on the back of the photograph itself, Mike Fox contemplating the problems of the world 240 pounds ago. But I'm one to talk, you know. How about that picture of Mike and me in the program there? One of our Democrat friends, Betty McGarry, saw that photo and proposed, well, once a geek, always a geek. And I said, how dare her? And she said, and I was told that she was talking about both of us. My personal pilgrimage at the side and service of Mike Fox began when I was 12 years old. And for 4 years later, he gave me the opportunity to direct his 1974 campaign, and it was a fountainhead experience in my life. Out of that experience came the opportunity to call many of you in this room my very dear friends. I met Darrell Barger, saw him earlier through that campaign, and it was Darrell who introduced me to my wife, Adrian, to Mike Hensley, my business partner, with who I've shared that experience the last 13 years. And though our career paths have headed in different directions, I really still consider myself one of Mike's lieutenants. In fact, I know that I'm the guy that when he really, really has messed up and the bottom falls out, that he seeks me out for consolation. He'll come to me with some mess like a check and a Hell's Angel. But I'll give him some advice and some encouragement and send him back into the game. But somewhere during the course of that conversation, he'll get this big hangdog, teary-eyed look on his face, and he'll say, Rick, you're my one true friend. Everybody else I've ever put my faith and trust in as a friend has ultimately turned around and screwed me. And I'll say, Mike, that's okay. If the day should ever come that I'd be the one to screw you, you can count on it being a real big one. Well, 24 years I've listened to his crap. And now I've got a chance to get a few things off my mind. Seriously, Mike Fox he has been my mentor, my rabbi, my teacher, tutored at his knee, I learned the lessons that have really served me well throughout my life. You know, Bill Bennett's got this book that's on the bestsellers list right now called The Book of Virtues. But it was Mike Fox who's taught me the real virtues of life. You can tell from my girth that, that he's taught me the virtue of immoderation at the dinner table. You know, in the advertising business, as a copywriter, we will often rely on the literary device of the double entendre. But it wasn't until I met Mike Fox that I knew anything of the idea of the double entree. And oh, what this man has taught me of the virtue of punctuality. I will remember one evening sitting in Bob Bennett's family room, sipping his cheap Chablis, waiting for Mike to show up to meet us at a 7:30 engagement. Well, he called about 8 o'clock and he said, "Don't worry, I'm on my way." Well, about 11, we were well into another jug of Krabari when Fox calls and said, "Be there real soon." Well, the next morning was always the occasion when we visited the Bennett's home, and Ruth Ann was serving breakfast to us all. The phone rang and said, "I'm on my way." Well, we went down to Republican headquarters there in Cleveland, and I think we taught a campaign seminar or something, and we went out to dinner afterwards and finally returned to the Bennetts for the evening, and at 7:30 p.m., 24 hours after his appointed time of arrival, Fox walks in and says, "Here I am." Which left me with the classic Fox maxim, "You're never late, so long as you're always on your way." And then, particularly being in a creative business as I am, it was Mike Fox who taught me the virtue of creative logistics. That is, that the shortest distance between 2 points is not necessarily a straight line. I remember another occasion when we were late getting out of Columbus. I think we were coming up to visit the Bennetts again. And we were late getting out of town. He says, "I've got to stop to pick up some candy, some suits, and some cigars." I said, "Okay." Well, about the time we got to Washington Courthouse, now we were going to Cleveland, remember? I said, "Mike, where are we going for this stuff?" And he said, "Well, we're going to Tri-County." I said, "Tri-County?" He says, "Yeah, that's where the candy is." I said, "Well, where in the hell are the cigars?" Which, no wonder he's always kept us waiting. But the most profound lesson of all that he's taught me is the virtue of a healthy sense of competition. I don't know whether Dick Love is here tonight, the guy who was Mike's opponent in the first 1974 campaign, but when we ran against this gentle, good-natured man in 1974, Fox had my 16-year-old mind convinced that we were soldiers of the cross doing battle with the devil incarnate. And perhaps the reason Mike has so many enemies, he's just so doggone good at making them, you know? There have been times over the years where I've said to him, "Mike, I think you're getting a little paranoid." And he says, "Rick, you're not paranoid if they really are following you." And if he's hard on the Democrats, he saves the very best of this spirit of competition for the members of his own party. I think it's only fitting that Ray Combs is the host tonight, because for Mike Fox, there's no feud like a family feud. Well, Mike, in that spirit, let me put your troubled mind to rest on a couple things I know continue to concern you. First, Buzz Lukens is gone, Mike. He's not coming back. He's finished. Give it up. Just give it up. And I don't care what you've told me. I've thought about this, and John Boehner was just too damn young in November of 1963 to have been the man on the grassy knoll. But you know, whether you're here as his friend or his foe, I can almost bet that at some point over the last 20 years, Mike Fox has been there for you. The smoke of battles may have obscured your memory of that time, but I know he's carried water for you somewhere along the line. The Bible says that no greater love hath any man that he'd lay down his life for a friend. And that's the kind of friend that Mike Fox has been to me for 24 years. And it's the kind of friend I hope I've been to him. But most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, it's the type of friend that he's been to everyone in this room and in this district that he served so well, and indeed all of the citizens of Ohio. And I'm only too proud to have shared something of that adventure and this evening with him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. Get a picture of that. Yeah, the stories you must know, I'll tell you. Kind of Orville Redenbacher to the max. It's great to hear those insights, and I think you alluded to it. I mean, a lot of people know, and I said it, and I'll say it every time I step to this podium. Mike Fox is a man that proves that you can measure past the fullness of your potential. He's not, no one will say he's the sharpest guy in the world. I said I would tell you, we surveyed 100 average people in Ohio. We asked them about you, Mike. They said that you were so slow that it took you 2 hours to watch 60 Minutes. But this is what I can't figure out. Coming to the podium next is a man that, if you believe what the billboards claim, our next guest is always right. And if you ever listen to his show, you know that the billboard basically speaks the truth. He's entertaining, informative. He's obviously knowledgeable on many subjects. He's very fair on the issues. He's tough when he believes something. He is a refreshing voice of reason, as opposed to Bill Cunningham, who's not here tonight. And actually, I'm amazed that he would be here tonight because he is such a fine individual. Ladies and gentlemen, from 700 WLW Middays, Mike McConnell.
Thank you very much. Glad to see Bill Cunningham's out of here. That is seriously about the quietest I've seen that man in about 5 years on this podium. He is talking to himself right now in his car on the way to the station, more so than he talked when he was standing up here. It's great to be here, and great to meet friends of Mike Fox who I've not met before. And good to know there are some people here that he goes out with, socializes with, other than for $125 a plate. This is the first time I've been out here. First time Mike ever called, tonight. Known the man for about 6 years. And Mike Fox really is, he's a talk host's dream. There are those perhaps on the House floor who are opposed to long-winded speeches. But there are those points in time when the news gets kind of slow. Nothing necessarily is going on. Nothing overly controversial. What do you do? What do you do at times like that in this town? Call Mike Fox. You try killing 20 hours a week when nothing's going on. The answer is you call Mike Fox. Occasionally, I'll leave on vacation. And you'll have people filling in. They don't do a great deal of talk. Just, they're happy to come in, do the job for you for a while. They have an idea of what they're going to do, but they say, how do I stretch this into 4 hours? Check the paper, see if Fox's name's in there. Mike Fox can run on. He's a bright man. I guess about 6 years I've known him, probably have him on at least 3 or 4 times a year. And generally he's a man with whom I'm in agreement. Most of you seem to be friends, colleagues, people who've known him for a long time. I've not known him as long. I couldn't really tell you with regard to girth control where Mike would stand. He's one of those guys who I guess he didn't just grow with the responsibility of the office, he bloated to a degree. He wants no one to make a fuss over him tonight. He wants everyone to treat him like you would any other great man, he told me on the way in tonight. His egotism could be nature's compensation for mediocrity. Could be, except this is not this man. With the shape he's in, his insurance agent is demanding his calendar and blotters back. Mike Fox is glad to talk on the program anytime. He's there at the drop of a hat. When it comes to campaign time, it's occasionally a different game. Mike is one of those, during a campaign, he'll take pretty much any question with an open mouth. You'll pose the question, there'll be a long pause, but generally he's got the answer. He's one of those, he stands on his record, has for a long time, does it for the most part to keep voters from taking a good look at it. But he refuses to answer any questions on the ground that could eliminate him. What I like best about him is he's one of those he realizes now, and he realized early on, you really have to study both sides of any given issue. There's no other way you can get around it. Get around the issue. I wrote some of these myself, you know. These aren't... I gave Cunningham the ones that were kind of on the cusp. Should have seen how far he was willing to go. He's a man in his district, he will do anything for the worker, just short of becoming one. When Mike Fox is on the program, one of the biggest pluses, there are those times of the year, around this time of the year, shortly after the holidays, before spring, you're kind of low on commercials. In my line of work, you don't play a record. You pretty much have to work until a commercial comes on. Mike Fox is one of those where if you need a trip to the men's room, only works if he's on the phone. If he's in the room, he knows you're gone. If he's on the phone, it could be as simple as, Mike, what about the weather? You're out the door, you're down the hall, you come back, he's still going on about the weather. The man is an absolute dream. 20 years, he's a hell of a politician. In the short amount of time I've known him, I've grown to respect him. He's a sharp man. He's not a cheap politician. At $120 for roast beef? Far from a cheap politician. And I guess in closing, the one thing I've noticed, mainly from what I've taken up from hearing the speakers who were here before me tonight, and it's a new side of Mike that I was unaware of, is basically that when he does ask you to vote for him and to vote for good government, what he's in fact asking for are 2 votes. I want to thank you a great deal for having me out here tonight, Mike. I've had a marvelous time, and whether news is slow or news is happening, it's always a pleasure to have you on the program. We'll do it again real soon. Man gets more airtime than any state politician anywhere around here, and for good reason. Mike Fox, congratulations.
Well, if that's how you get on the air, I'm going to have to become a politician. Thank you, Mike. You notice the real friends, as soon as other people finish, they leave, like it's the Tonight Show, and they're too big to stay with the other speakers. Mike, your show's not till Monday afternoon. I mean, at least Cunningham could say he had to run. I understand. Mike McConnell, ladies and gentlemen. Great commentator, and my parents love him, I might add. But right now, here comes another one of our own, someone who has represented us well, who served with Mike in the Ohio legislature, side by side. We're honored to have him here tonight. In a very short time in Congress, he has made his presence felt in Congress. Some of you have heard of the Gang of Seven. He's provided leadership Also, instantly, in a very short period of time in Congress, he's been not only a leader in Ohio politics, but is beginning to make a headway in Washington. And before I bring him, I don't want to take away anything, and it's not a night to roast him, but I was back in Washington for the presidential election, and I was at the Capitol Hill Club, and I was in awe that I was there with the chairman of the RNC, and they were telling me why and how we were really going to win, and why I should really not be afraid to speak out as an entertainer, that it wouldn't hurt my career. And I was wondering about Congressman Boehner, who was brand new from our district, and I had heard that he was making great strides, and I looked down at the Republican newsletter, and it says, Boehner wins Congressional Golf Tournament. And we are honored to have him here tonight. He is the United States representative of the 8th District of Ohio. He's a rising star in the Republican Party of Ohio, Congressman John Boehner, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, Ray, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's certainly a pleasure to be here with you. I'm really surprised that I am here, though. You know, there were hundreds of people around the state of Ohio who wanted to be here tonight to have a shot at Mike Fox. Hundreds. I know I heard from most of them who kept calling me all week, giving me stories that I might relay to all of you. But they're not here, and I am. I found it interesting that Corwin Nixon gave a little presentation while we were eating dinner. Based on what he had to say, I think he filmed this about 15 years ago. You know, Corwin's got the best hair in Columbus. And Mike, I think it's time to call Dick Celeste. Call Dickie and tell him the president's plan is dead, his job's over. In a couple of weeks, he'll be back in Ohio looking for another job. But it really is good to be here. With all of you. You know, in life we celebrate a lot of things. But 20 years of Mike Fox and public service, I had to ask myself, well, how do you do that? They didn't say, well, you didn't have to say you liked it, you just have to recognize it. So I'm here, but I really was surprised. You know, over the years, Mike and I have had a rather tenuous relationship at times. I think all of you know that. And kind of reminds me of the Mexican fable. You know, the story about the turtle and the scorpion. Turtle was on the edge of the Rio Grande River, and he was about ready to cross, and his scorpion came along and said, hey, Mr. Turtle, I'd like to have a ride over. And the turtle looked at him rather hesitantly and said, well, I'm not sure. And turtle promised him, or the scorpion promised him he'd be good. And so he climbed on, and off they started. And about halfway across the river, the scorpion bit the turtle right on the back of the neck. And the turtle whipped his neck around and said, why did you have to do that? We're both going to die. And the scorpion got this big grin on his face and said, in a rather apologetic tone, well, I'm sorry, it's just my nature. I think all of you know in this room that in 1990, I wasn't Mike's first choice for this congressional seat. As a matter of fact, I was a rather long way down the list. Of course, at the top of the list was Mike's own name. So after the primary, a friend of mine suggested that I call Mike, and I asked him for his help in the general election. And I thought about it, and I was trying to find something that was comparable to asking Mike Fox for his help and receiving it. And the only thing I could think about was calling up the Boston Strangler and asking him for a neck massage. You know, Mike has all the characteristics of a dog, except loyalty. This is a roast, right? Somebody had to do the dirty work. That's why they invited me. One day, a certain state senator stopped me, and he said, Boehner, you know, if you had Muammar Gaddafi, and you had Saddam Hussein and Mike Fox in a room, and he had a gun, and you only had 2 bullets, you know what you do? I said, no. He said, you shoot Fox twice. Mike, now you think about all those state senators who might have said that. You might be able to find one of them. You know, being in politics with Mike teaches one the art of diplomacy. It's kind of like Tanya Harding told Nancy Kerrigan this afternoon, break a leg. You know how Mike taught his son about politics? He put him on top of a ladder, stood out and stretched his arms and said, "Okay, son, jump." As he stepped aside and his son crashed to the ground, he said, "There, that'll teach you to trust politicians." You know, Mike is often accused of not being as supportive of the Republican Party as some would like him to be. And I'm here to tell you, Mike, that's simply not true. And all of you, it's not true. As you all know, Mike is about as cheap as they get. Thankfully, he's turned this into a virtue. And during election time, he gets so cheap trying to save money for his campaign that he doesn't leave any tips. But when he gets up, and all he does is look at the server and say, "Don't forget to vote Democrat." You know, it's not hard to see why people have a tough time trying to figure out whether Mike Fox is a Democrat or a Republican. He eats like an elephant, and he acts like a jackass. It kind of reminds me of something the great late Speaker of the House, Sam Rayburn, was fond of saying, "Some men grow in office, others just swell." I saw Mike one day in the gym at the Capitol Club in Columbus, and needless to say, I was pretty surprised that I saw Mike there. I said, "Mike, I'm really surprised to see you here. I didn't know you were a member here." He said, "Oh, yeah." He says, "I've been a member here for years. I just didn't know they had a gym." Well, when I was in Columbus with Mike, he was notorious for his organizational abilities. It's not that Mike is messy. It's just that he makes Oscar Madison look like Felix Unger. Occasionally, in the name of good government, he would send one of our pages out to clean his car. And somewhere between the official documents, the newspapers, those half-eaten Big Macs, and even a few days later, the pages would return to work, usually renewed by the experience. I've heard him say, "What a great exercise in democracy." Mike knows this is true. Walking into Mike's office reminds me of a sign I saw in a hardware store one time. It said, "We've got it if you can find it." Now, if you haven't been in Mike's office and if you haven't heard about it, there was only one office in the history of mankind that was worse, and that was Bob Netzley's, who had documents that went back over 30 years. But Mike's office used to be around the corner from me. I used to have Joanne Davidson's office right around the corner from Mike's when I got there in 1985. This podium would not fit in that office. I'm serious. It was a broom closet. But Mike has this keen ability to evaluate almost anything. It's kind of like the time that he had a late education meeting one Tuesday night, and he had to go back to his office afterwards, and so he was reading some documents and happened to fall asleep. While he was asleep, the security guards came around, certainly couldn't see him in his office, and they turned all the lights off. Now, this is a true story. And sometime in the middle of the night, Mike woke up, scurrying around, trying to find where he was, trying to find the lights. He couldn't figure it out, and finally, after thinking about it, it came to him. He knew then that he was blind. It's a true story. You know, I'm really glad that Mike made it here tonight on time. Mike greeted me at the door. It's the first time in the history that Mike's ever been on time for anything. And I understand when they were starting to put this event together, they thought about having a breakfast. When they realized they couldn't expect Mike there before 10 o'clock, they thought they better change it. Well, there was one occasion in the 10 years that I've known Mike Fox when he's been on time. And that was at my birdie hunt, my golf outing last year out at Beckett Ridge. We had a problem. They had a group out the morning before. Our event got pushed back an hour and a half, and Mike showed up just on time. You should have seen the look on his face when he realized he had to play all 18 holes. You know, I've had this birdie hunt for 10 years, and for 10 years I've invited Mike. 5 of those 10 years, Mike showed up, late, of course. The other 5 years, we never did figure out what happened to him. But speaking of golf, I've got to tell you a story that's one of the funniest things that's ever happened to me in my life. One day, they called off session the next day, and I got a call about playing golf at Muirfield Village Golf Club with a friend of ours. Early 7:30 one morning. So I go out there, I warm up, I go to the first tee with our host, And he said, have you seen Fox? I said, no, I haven't seen him. Well, he said, he and some other guy are supposed to be here. So it comes to our appointed time. The starter pushes us off. It's my first time playing Muirfield. I'm excited. Hit this great drive, and we play the first hole. Always turning around to see if Mike and this other person are coming. Never did see him coming. So we got to the second tee, and all of a sudden I see Mike and this other fellow and these two caddies running down the first hole. So we wait for him, and we tee off. And I'm looking at Mike. And he's got this baggy pair of shorts on that down over his knees. This is long before it became fashionable. I think they were purple. And I think he had this red shirt on that was too big for Mike. You imagine. Because the shirt came halfway down to his knees. Then he had this pair of golf shoes on that, I don't know if he borrowed them from Goodwill. But Mike hits this great drive. And so we're walking down the hall, down the second fairway, this host and I on one side, and I see Mike and this other fellow who I'd met, but I didn't know who he was, walking down the other side of the fairway. And finally I look over at Mike and I say, hey, Fox, how about tucking in your shirt? Somebody might think you're from Hamilton. Just teasing Mike. And so Mike's walking down the fairway, and he unbuckles his pants. This is at Muirfield Village. It's kind of the mecca of golf, and he tucks his shirt in. So we hit our shots up toward the green, and I'm on the green, and Mike's friend is over on my side of the green with me, and we're lining up our shots, and I say to him, I'm really sorry I didn't get your name. He says, oh, I'm Joe Kakuzu. I said, well, what do you do? He said, I'm publisher of the Hamilton Journal. I don't know that I've ever been that embarrassed. You know, just after the state legislature redistricted Mike's district, he stopped in this hair salon one day, and he said to this lady running, he said, hi, he says, I'm Mike Fox, and I'm running for state representative in the new 59th House District. And the lady looked at him and said, well, that's funny. My gals and I around here were just laughing about that this morning. So then he went next door to a tavern, and he introduced himself to the bartender. And the bartender quickly said, yes, he says, I've heard of you. He said, now I'm going to give you time to tell the rest of the story. But just after Mike talked to the bartender, guy at the end of the bar says, you know, that politician, he's a horse's ass. Some other guy came across the bar and punched this guy at the end of the bar, punched him right in the mouth. And the bartender looked at a second fellow and said, hey, you must be a real fan of Mike Fox. He said, no, not at all. He says, this is horse country. Mike, you know, recently had a birthday. He was 45. He always stays a year ahead of me. I really can't believe it, Mike. You don't act a day over 14. You know, thinking back to 1990, I have to admit how wrong I was when I was thinking that Mike Fox wasn't qualified to be a member of Congress. Then we found out he couldn't balance his checkbook. Well, Mike, you have a broad base of support. You've all seen the pages of accomplishments, 31 pages of accomplishments that he sent out. It's a rather impressive list, especially when you consider that Mike has been in the minority party for all of his career in the State House. Mike is the only legislator you know that can successfully put together a coalition of seniors, doctors, Medicaid recipients, and Hell's Angels. Oh, I'm sorry, Mike. Motorcycle enthusiasts. Well, I guess it's time to say all of the nice stuff, Mike, but I ran out of notes. I think all of you know that Mike and I have a love-hate relationship. We really are good friends today. But we both have a deep respect for each other. I know the years that I spent with Mike and the years since, Mike is certainly one of the most creative legislators that we have in Columbus. He's a gentleman who works hard, fights hard for what he believes in, and along the way has taught me many, many lessons that I'll never forget. He's a friend to all of us in this room. We're proud of him, and we want to wish you, Mike, another 20 years of success in government. Thank you.
Well done. Well done. It's a very amazing story, and only those of you not from this area might be offended that Congressman Boehner would have made a joke about Hamilton, the way dressing that way, that could have qualified him to be the mayor, literally. There's nothing, I mean, that just shows that you did not know the constituency, and again, what you found as an embarrassing moment on your golf course, to anyone in this room knows it's not the first time that Mike Fox showed his butt. Nor will it be the last, and he doesn't have to have on a big shirt to do it. If we could thank one person here tonight who really is responsible for helping get the excitement and enthusiasm of politics or government into the blood of Mike Fox, is our next speaker. 24 years ago, he gave Mike Fox his first job in politics. He was then the organizational director for the senatorial candidate Robert Taft. Mike was hired for campaign operations for 13 counties at a salary of $100 per week. Overpaid by my standards, by what I know he did. But the person who hired him at the time went on to become the chairman of Cuyahoga County Republican Party, and today he is the chairman not only of the Ohio Republican Party, but I will tell you that he is the president, or he's the chairman of what could be the most important state in the United States of America, and picking what senator will represent Ohio in the years to come. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to have you bring to the podium Mr. Robert Bennett. Bob Bennett.
Well, I was going to start off with the confession that I have kept a secret all these 24 years, that I did bring Mike Fox into his first paid political job. And I hope that you will all forgive me for that disastrous deed. You know, I want to tell you something. Mike sent me out some information in advance of coming down here tonight. Nice letter, thanking me for agreeing to be a celebrity roaster, and enclosing material for your review which highlights some of my legislative accomplishments and activities. Celebrating 20 years of leadership makes a difference. This is 37 pages. Mike, State Representative Mike Fox, a legislative record, that's 31 pages. Listen, Ruth Ann and I have known Mike since 1970. He was a regional Taft campaign director. And as many of you know, knowing Mike just for 1 year is an experience, but to know him for 20 years, 24 years, that's outrageous. You know, throughout these last 24 years, I've accumulated some stories, both Ruth Ann and I have, that I'd like to share a couple of them with you. The first one is, I titled is Razzle Finds a Second Home. And when Mike and sometimes Rick Siegel would come up and have some business in Cleveland, they'd stay at the house, and our house out in Fairview Park, and no member of our family would be more excited about seeing Mike than our little Chinese pug, a little dog called Razzle. And the reason that Razzle was excited is because when Mike came with his suitcase. Now, you have to first know that Mike lived out of his suitcase in those years. And it contained a combination of things, both clean and dirty clothes, mostly dirty, personal hygiene supplies, which consisted of a razor and a bottle of cheap cologne, and remnants of his last meal, which he would save for later, such as a half-eaten Big Mac and a candy bar. And during Mike's first visits, it seemed strange to the family that whenever Mike visited our home, Razzle couldn't be found. But as soon as Mike would leave, Razzle would come out from her hiding place. After Mike's several visits, we learned that Razzle wasn't hiding at all. He was just living in Mike's suitcase. Mike's suitcase was Razzle's portable dream home. After all, to Razzle, it smelled good, made a comfortable bed, it was stocked with food. What more could a dog ask for? Second story I'll tell you is kind of like Mike's time problems. We've all had it. Mike's never has shown up on time for any meeting with me in 24 years. If he ever did, I'd be the most shot guy in the world. But this was a weekend visit. Mary Ann was joining us on Saturday. Mike was coming up on Friday night. This started out, I'll be up there about 7 o'clock. I got a lot of political items to go over with you, okay? Get a call about 9, I'm on my way. I'll be there by the time the 11 o'clock news. Get a call at 11. I'm just getting ready to leave. I got held up. I'll see you. Showed up about 1:15. We sat up and talked till about 3:30, and I said, Mike, I got a 8:30 meeting downtown. I'm going to bed. Mike said, well, we'll talk tomorrow. I don't have anything to do till later on, Saturday evening. I went downtown. I came back home, had a meeting with some of my young friends concerning some sailing in the afternoon about 2 o'clock. I walked in about 1:15, and Ruth Ann says, I'm concerned. She says, Mike's still sleeping. He missed breakfast. And I looked at my watch, and I said, hell, he's missed lunch. I said, let him sleep. We went about and finished our business, and about 4 o'clock, I think Mike got up, came in. We were about that time getting ready to celebrate. We were going to have a little spaghetti dinner. Had about 15, 20 people in. I said, Mike, what can I get you? We had some snacks out on the bar there, some peanuts and popcorn. Mike says, I have a scotch. Pretty soon he had another scotch. Pretty soon another scotch. Spaghetti time came around. And about this time, Mary Ann showed up. Says, we got to get some food in this boy. And I remember Mike sitting down at the end of the table just like it was yesterday, and I saw him with this plate full of spaghetti and some meatballs there. And Mike was taking those meatballs and he was dropping them in Razzle's mouth about one at a time. And I said, Mike, aren't you going to eat that stuff? And he'd roll that fork a little bit and get a little spaghetti, and I think he got about 2 mouthfuls, and I'd look down at the end of the table, and all of a sudden Mike's laying right on the table, sound asleep, and his chin was about 2 inches from the spaghetti plate. Mary Ann retrieved Mike that evening, took him back into the bedroom. He got up the next morning about 9 o'clock, 9:30, made a phone call and said, found out that the county chairwoman, I think, Edna Fath, was it, Mike, had passed away, and Mike says, I have to get back to Hamilton. And we fixed a quick breakfast, and he left. Now, I figured that Mike had showed up sometime Friday night. He left sometime Sunday, and we concluded about 2 hours of politics right after he arrived and didn't have any time for anything else because Mike was sleeping or eating all the rest of the time. You know, being chairman of the Republican Party, I do have access to an extensive clipping file in Columbus. So this past week, I dug out our file on Mike Fox. Some of these clips date back to when Mike was in his first term in the Ohio House of Representatives. So I put together a brief outline, which I'm calling the Distinguished Public Service Career of Mike Fox. Here we go. These are headlines. Mike Fox declares himself a political gypsy. Mike Fox urges deportment of Iranian college students. Says Khomeini is a two-bit dictator who hasn't stored up enough religious treasures in heaven to put a down payment on a harp. Great quote. Had a lot to do with Ohio politics, too. Mike Fox allegedly steals reapportionment plans from the Democrats. Mike Fox gets sued by Democrats for stealing reapportionment plans. Mike Fox's aide sues Democrats for accusing him of stealing reapportionment plans. Mike Fox gets in trouble with the Ohio Elections Commission for slanderous campaign charges against Democrats. Next one, this is the favorite one. Mike Fox ousts 2 members of Ohio GOP House leadership. Mike Fox says of House Speaker Vern Rife, quote, I think he's a darn good speaker. It's just frustrating to have to deal with him. I can see Mike getting halfway through that and thinking, I got to get back to my Republican credentials real quick. Mike Fox calls Alex Larshenkoff, who's a political chairman up in Summit County, a political pit bull who's turned on his master. Mike Fox calls for Buzz Lukin's resignation after having sex with a 16-year-old girl. Mike Fox proposes spanking high school students who do drugs, drink alcohol, and skip school. Mike Fox produces videotape on, quote, how to lobby the legislature. That was a good one. Mike Fox is accused by Democrats of making business deals with organized crime. That was a good one. This is the best one, though. Mike Fox gets beat up for no reason. And Mike Fox angers House Speaker Vern Wright by telling dirty joke during House session. No place could I find what the joke was. It's obvious that Mike Fox's political career hasn't lacked any controversy. But seriously, I know of no other representative who is more in touch with their district or works harder to meet the concerns of the people they represent than Mike Fox. Mike is in government to make a difference. He's been at the forefront on legislation ranging from education to crime to the economy, and all this in order to make government work better for the people of his district. I don't know of anybody who has more creative ideas when it comes to legislation, or nobody that you can go to and bounce an idea off of and can take an idea and make it and create a piece of legislation that will benefit the people of this district and the people of Ohio better than Mike Fox. It's been a privilege for me to work with Mike over the past really 24 years, and I think that you have one of the most dedicated legislators in the legislature in Mike Fox. And Mike, I thank you for the privilege of being with you this year.
Thank you, Bob. Great headlines. I mean, I would not consider myself ignorant, but these are things that we just don't hear down here in Hamilton. Some great quotes, but nothing surprising about Michael Fox. He is tough on crime. I remember he's gotten tougher and tougher. His first legislative act on crime, I'll never forget it. In Hamilton, in this county, he said, if you kill a man, you have to make a court appearance. It was an amazing thing. You couldn't mail the fine in anymore after that. It was quite a revelation to a lot of people, an eye-opener. To be the final speaker at such a cherished event, this tells a lot about the character of our representative. This is a day and a time when the word lobbyist could be considered a bad word. But those in government know that lobbyists could also be great sources of information. Be it all as that may know that lobbyists can be good or bad, no politician would hang with a lobbyist in public, or at least have them be the final speaker at their tribute, which Mike has chosen to do here tonight. He is a fellow Ohioan, but he is one of the premier lobbyists. And lobbyists get bad names sometimes like politicians do. There's a difference in being a politician and a government leader. And this individual works very close with Mike, and they are good friends. They met on the Ohio Committee to re-elect the president in 1972. They have that in common, plus neither were indicted or convicted of any criminal wrongdoings. I think my campaign slogan in that year is indictment is not a conviction. And Bob Bennett said his best, that he does know his constituency. This man coming to the podium is president and owner of the very successful Columbus-based lobbying firm. He is our final roaster before Mr. Fox will take this podium, so keep your energy up. His colleagues know him to be knowledgeable, effective, and first class, truly as a legislative assistant, if you want to know the right answers. He is the president of Thomas Green and Associates, Tom Green, ladies and gentlemen, to the podium. A man that I like to see. Come on down.
Right there. You've been waiting for that all night.
It's nice to know that if a fight breaks out, there's one person I could take in this room.
I was 6'6" when I started lobbying Ray. Our height is not the only thing Ray and I have in common. We were both turned down by Heather Locklear. Well, maybe you've done better since then, twice. Thanks very much, Ray. It's a singular thrill for me to be here tonight and sitting with all of you, and particularly with some of the roasters. How often does a lobbyist get the opportunity to sit with probably one of the next governors of the state of Ohio, certainly the next Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives, the great knowledgeable budget director for our state. That's good, thank you. And she thanked you. Probably the most outstanding Republican chairman in the country, two of the outstanding radio and media personalities in the world. Matter of fact, when I saw the lineup, I was excited about being here. I'm very disappointed when I got here, as I'm sure some of the others were, because I thought it was the movie actor that we were roasting. To drive all the way down here from Columbus in terrible weather to roast a two-bit politician was not something. When I came here tonight, I asked Wendy Bowermaster why I had been chosen to represent the lobbying community in this roast of Representative Fox. I never gave Mike an honorarium, probably one of the few who didn't. I have never contributed to his campaign. He always told me that he would not stop at anything to do things for me, and he certainly has not done anything for me. I never took him to lunch or dinner, although apparently others have. And I'm a Republican who generally prefers the company of Republicans who vote like Republicans. Wendy said that she had contacted more than 50 State House lobbyists, and none of them had anything good to say about Mike Fox. Now, I note some of them are here, and they all have bills, probably something to do with health care, perhaps, making sure that Mike sees them. And if they've been at this business as long as I have, they'll know it won't do them any good anyway. Apparently, I was the only one that would agree to come, and I got to say, Wendy tricked me. She told me this was a retirement party for Mike Fox. And I didn't want to miss that. It would be my fondest dream. But I made the long trip down here, bad weather, gave up the opportunity, as you all did, to watch the ice skating Snow White versus the Wicked Witch. But I really wanted to see what you folks look like. What kind of people would send Mike Fox to the legislature and do it every 2 years for the last 10 years? I mean, by now you should know about what he's doing up there. I mean, is there a better example of a public official feeding at the trough? Is this the poster child for term limits? It is true that I have known Mike Fox for a long time. Matter of fact, I knew him when he only had one chin. We both worked on President Nixon's re-election campaign. It was Mike who suggested that it would be very helpful to have some information from the Democrat headquarters. It is true. I was there when Mike first took his oath of office 20 years ago, and I'll bet you folks never dreamed what a big man Mike would become in the General Assembly. When Mike tells you he carries a lot of weight in Columbus, who could argue with that? Mike is a lobbyist's dream, the only guy who's available for dinner more than once a night. But you know, you probably are aware of this. This is all going to change. In their wisdom, the legislature recently passed a new ethics law. The law says a lobbyist cannot spend more than $75 a year on a legislator. Folks, this won't cover Mike's appetizers. This is why the new law is also known as the Mike Fox Weight Reduction Act of 1994. Obviously, Mike has enjoyed the good life, and he's not looking forward to term limits. After all, he's been a politician for most of his adult life. So what's he going to do? He's been working with a career counselor who initially tried to get him a contract as a sumo wrestler. But when that failed, they ran several personality tests and determined that Mike had some considerable acting talent. After all, he acts like a statesman for 1 month every 2 years. His agent narrowly missed getting Mike the starring role in Free Willy. But the Olympics may give Mike the break he was looking for. Casting agents are considering Mike for the role of Tonya Harding's bodyguard. I promise